Please join me in welcoming Robert Tucker.
Well, good morning. It feels like afternoon, but good morning. Yes, morning. They say in this show business that we're in, don't follow kids and pets. And I would add, and football players, especially when they do card tricks. But good to be with all of you. This is the kind of conference that I absolutely love. This is a leadership conference, and we have a lot to talk about in a very short period of time here. I want to get you out of here at high noon, and so let's get started. I want to talk with you about the most disruptive decade ahead in human history. How about that? That's what you call the 2x4 to alert you to where we're going here. Yes, I believe that it will also be an opportunistic decade for those of us who are prepared for it, but quite frankly, rather brutal for those who are not. So what I want to do today is to help you to master the changes that are going on, to give you some new tools and some mindsets with which to approach this new decade of change. So a little bit more about my background here, as we heard from the intro there, but yeah, I started, like Doug, living on a farm. And back in the day, mine was in South Carolina. We had electricity, we had indoor plumbing, but not much else. It was pretty deprived. But like Doug also, I was ambitious. I wanted to go places. I wanted to see things. And in 1967, I came home from Boy Scout camp, and my dad said, "We're moving to California." Wow, cool. And we get out to California. In 67, as some of you will remember, it was the summer of love, right? It was craziness. It was change. I felt like an immigrant from Madagascar or some other country because it was so much change. And I sort of became an introvert, but I began to enjoy and appreciate writing. And I wanted to become a writer. Well, fast forward a few years here, went to college. I was a lackluster student. I got a corporate job, but I was not interested in that. It was just a way to make a living. I got promoted to LA. Then I got fired. And I said, it's now or never, Tucker, if you're going to do what you always wanted to do, which is to become a freelance independent writer. And so I did. And I began interviewing not the celebrities and so forth that you think about writers in Hollywood having to write about. I began to interview visionaries and scientists and all of the leading thinkers of that day, because anybody who's anybody comes eventually through Los Angeles, especially if they have a book to promote. So I began sitting at the knee of some of the world's top thinkers. People, I don't want to drop a lot of names here, but people like Dr. Jonas Salk. People like, gosh, the guy that started Intel, Andy Grove. Fred Smith, Federal Express. Although I had to go to Memphis to interview him. But many, many, many others. And I would spend several weeks just absorbing that person's MO. How did they get to do what they do? What are their ideas? And so forth. And so out of that, I wrote a book about what makes these innovators tick. And so that then led me to give speeches at Rotary clubs and speaking for free around town at the Chamber of Commerce and so forth. And finally somebody said, well, what would you charge, to do a talk? I like what you have to say. Would you like to, come to our company and share that idea? And so that's what I did. I began to move into consulting. And here we are 40 years later. And as was said in the intro, all over the world, it's been quite a great ride. Recently, though, my focus has changed. My focus has changed to building a better future. So it's not just how do we become innovative, but it's what do we leave as a legacy? What do we want to be when we grow up, so to speak. And so these 7 mindsets are what I'm writing about in the book. And I'd like to just share a few points in each of these. For example, the preparedness mindset. Plan, pivot, and navigate under conditions of extreme uncertainty, because that's the environment that we're entering into, right? Now, as I mentioned, I was a Boy Scout. And of course, the Boy Scout motto is, be prepared, right? I would ask adults, what does that mean? Be prepared. Well, I don't know. Exactly. And then I found out what being unprepared. So I was on a solo backpacking trip in the Grand Teton Mountains of Wyoming. And it's getting to the end of the day. I pulled off the trail. I pitched my tent, made a little supper. There's some daylight left. I see a sunset in the distance. So I hike across this broad meadow, and I sit there on a rock and enjoy the sunset. Well, when I get up to go back to my tent, whoa, conditions have completely changed. It's almost pitch black. How can this be, right? So I get back to where I left my little pup tent, and I just know it's going to be right there for me, but I can't find it. In fact, I can't see my hand in front of my face. It is that dark. And so finally, I slept that night under a pine tree with a Forest Service map as my blanket. Now, it was the middle of summer, but hey, when it rains, it rains. When it's cold, right? Doesn't matter. I survived. But I learned 3 things that night. 3 things that I want to share with you. One is conditions can change rapidly when we're least prepared, when we're not expecting, we're not paying attention. And number 2, you've got to have a tool with you, a flashlight in this case, right? And so those are the things that I wanted to focus with you on today. What are the tools that you're going to need over this next decade to thrive and prosper? Because you see, we need to unpack what's going on with this decade. There will be, we say this in the book, there will be more change in 10 years than in the previous 100 years. That's how fast this thing is going to go. There will be more breakdowns in society, in business, in the economy, in the geopolitical world, but also more breakthroughs in science, in medicine, and so forth. The future could tip either way. You hear more talk today about a dystopian future. You hear more talk today about a world that we're creating of abundance and possible utopia. And it'll all happen over this next 10 years, that we're going to take one or the other direction, because we are at an inflection point in our evolution. I would even go so far as to say that we have left the agricultural era, we have left the industrial era, we've left the information era, and now we're squarely into the age of acceleration. On November 30th, 2022, we entered the age of acceleration, because that was the day that ChatGPT released generative AI into society. And tens of millions of people have begun to download these types of generative AI tools. So we will need, in order to survive and succeed in this new era, to disrupt ourselves more often. The other day, a good friend of mine, his son is the head of Google AI. And through his father, I learned that he said, I think I've got about 5 years until personal obsolescence sets in. And I would ask you, what is the mean time between where you are now and when you're going to be obsolete, right? It's kind of an interesting question or dilemma to think about, but you and I have a shelf life like a loaf of bread at the supermarket. And unless we do some of the things that we're going to talk about here in just a moment, we will be obsolete. There is no getting around that. And then finally, we're moving away from a linear world, fall, winter, spring, and summer, into an exponential world where change is all the time. And it's moving faster. Now, not all change moves at an exponential rate, okay? Demographic change, social change, economic change, technological. But technological change is like a hockey stick. The rate of AI and penetration into our society and into this world is exponential. And so you have a gap between where we are, or on a linear scale, and then where that exponential change is taking society. And I submit to you that it is during this gap that what is happening there with that gap is that more and more people are future shocked, to use a term that Alvin Toffler, the futurist, came up with over 50 years ago to describe the anxiety of too much change too fast. And so, regardless of our industry or profession or title, the need to rethink, reskill, and reinvent the way we add value would determine how well we navigate the acceleration age. And in talking to many of you last night and before this conference, I'm seeing that this type of change is already happening right here in this industry. I talked to accounts payable department head last night. She said, we had 20 people about 3 years ago. Today we have 6 people, right? So tens of thousands of white-collar jobs are vanishing as AI starts to bite. This was from last year, Wall Street Journal. McKinsey, current technologies could automate 45% of the activities people are paid to perform today. So the question is, we've always assumed that there would be new jobs to replace the old jobs. That's sort of a truism in technology, right? But the question is then, will history repeat itself here with AI? Or will this cause massive disruption throughout society as more jobs are eliminated and more jobs at the entry level are never created or never staffed? And what will that do to the pipeline? So to draw back here, I want to create an environment for U Incorporated, okay? Now, you may be saying, well, what is U Incorporated? Well, U Incorporated, I want you to think about your own career, and so we're going to call that U Incorporated. Because today you're working with XYZ company, but you're going to have 5 careers in your lifetime, so I want you to think about these kinds of issues independently of that, and vis-a-vis from your personal development, right? The future arriving at our doorstep will be unlike anything we've seen before. So to navigate this new terrain, we're going to need more than knowledge in our specialized fields. We are going to need a new mindset. We must become navigators, forward thinkers, demographers, historians, collaborators, and possibility thinkers. We will flourish by thinking of ourselves as pioneers in a new land, unafraid to chart new paths. I'm excited. I'm excited about the opportunities of the future if we adopt a futurist mindset. Now, what is that? Well, futurists are like historians, except historians are managing the past, and they're looking at the past and trying to recreate the past. We're trying to put together a roadmap of what the future will most possibly look like. So there's the probable future, there's the possible future, and there's the preferred future. And this goes as you create in your organization's futures, as it goes in your career, in your family, and so forth. So the goal here is that by doing these sorts of things that we're going to talk about or just remind ourselves of to do, that the goal is that we make smarter decisions. You're making about let's just say 1,000 decisions a day, and most of them are very trivial decisions. You know, do you want cream with your coffee? Do you want whatever, right? But some of those decisions that you're making today in your organization, in your life, are forming your future. And those decisions are based on a prediction. And that prediction is based on everything you know about the decision. So the question is, how do you get the right knowledge, the right information, so that you can make the smartest decisions possible? You see, inside the head of us, each of us in this room, there are two engines. And there's the delivery engine and there's the discovery engine. Inside every organization that's represented in this room, there are two engines, the delivery engine and the discovery engine. Right now, the delivery engine predominates. The discovery engine often gets short-shrifted. So today we want to kind of bring it back. What is the discovery engine? Well, this is where we discover new ideas. This is where we discover new opportunities. This is where we discover new goals and objectives that we want to go after, new aspirations, if you will. And so we have to be mindful in an organization about how we're resourcing each of these. Because so often, as I say, the delivery engine, that's getting product out the door, that's meeting the deadlines, that's serving the customers, that's doing all the things, turning the crank. But the discovery engine cannot be short-shrifted in a time like this, lest we fall off. And so in my field of innovation and futurism, there are numerous techniques to help us do this. And some of these might be familiar with you. Some of you might be using some of these techniques. In the field of consulting, we sort of compete to have the best tools. For example, look down there by the first rower, jobs to be done. That's an idea that you've probably heard of Clayton Christensen, the disruptor's dilemma, right, out of Harvard. But the tool that I like that he came up with is jobs to be done. It's a great tool for sort of sussing out what your customer would like to do. What are their unarticulated needs that they might like you to solve? And people like Doug Clark are doing this sort of intuitively. They don't even need a tool. They're just thinking this way all the time. They're asking themselves, how can I add more value here to my customer? How can I make my customer's job easier? How can I take on my customer's problem? And those are the people that inherit the future. And so another tool is, you've heard of SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Well, in this book, we introduced a whole new framework. It's called Ditto. And it's simply this. When you see a trend, when something comes on your radar and you don't know about it, right? You don't know where it's going. You don't know how powerful it is. Maybe you read an article in the New York Times or the Harvard Business Review, wherever, right? You say, gosh, I don't know anything about that. I want to run that through my system. So it's very simple. What is the direction of this trend? What are the implications of this trend? In other words, who's going to be, where is this one going to go? What are the ramifications of this trend? And then who's threatened by this? Are we threatened by this? Could this be a threat? And then, of course, finally, and more importantly, and most importantly, opportunity. What are the opportunities that might accrue out of this? And so, if you take any category of change, and this is something that I would like to suggest that you begin to do more, is look outside of just technology, right? Or industry trends. And look across the board, because demographic trends might be a great example here. What's the big demographic trend that's going on that's really it's going to affect this country over the next 10 years? What are the implications of an aging society, right, that's more using the healthcare system much, much more than younger people do, and so forth, right? You see a lot of mistakes because people who are decision makers are not doing this kind of thing very well. Just to give you a great example of a demographic megaforce of change that was not put through the ditto process properly, let's look at China's one-child policy. Now, in 1979, they're looking at a overpopulation kind of motif, and they're saying, wait a minute, how do we get control of this? And so a bunch of men around the table said, hey, I know what, let's just tell people they can only have one child. Yeah, that'll do it, that's great, sounds good. And that's exactly what they did. Fast forward to today, where are we with that one? Oh, China is just facing a demographic fall-off, but not just China. I mean, if we look across the board, Western society, women are just not having as many kids today, right? So there are various reasons to look outside of just certain areas. Technological, of course, this is the main focus of this conference. Social and cultural megaforces of change. Boy, we could really get off on that one. If we had more time here, we don't. So I was going to have us maybe, at our table, just maybe take one of these and then put it through the ditto framework, but we don't have time. So let's talk about the third one here. So preparedness mindset. The second one is the futurist mindset. And the third one is, are you adaptable? And we all think, gosh, yeah, of course, I'm adaptable. And, but history shows that this is one of the hardest things for us humans to do, is to adapt. Because we don't see the need to adapt, right? Good old Charles Darwin said, it's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent. Rather, it is the one that is most adaptable to change. Truer words were never spoken. But what does that mean? Well, much of my career has been spent with sort of helping or trying to help companies that were in the hot seat of disruption. Quite often it was too late. Not all of my career was these sorts of companies, but gosh, quite a number. I'll give an example, Nokia. So in 2006, this is the Business Week Business Week list of the most innovative companies in the world. And you see there that Nokia has moved up to number 8. And they are riding high. They are minting money. They are going with their product all over the world. They're making phones. They're seemingly innovative. They're making them smaller, like little candy bars. Remember that? What could possibly go wrong? And that very year, they invited me to this very prestigious sort of briefing of their high potential managers. They flew them in from all over the world for a session on innovation. Now, that's kind of surprising, right? But they hired me to lead this session, about 50 or so people. And before I got there, I did a little survey with these folks. And one of the questions on the survey was very simply this. What are the barriers to innovation at the Nokia Corporation? And I kind of expected they would just leave that one blank, right? No way. No, they came back with things that really surprised me. Well, came back with a list that looked something like this. We're actually a risk-averse company, right? Our culture is risk-averse. Lack of time to work on new ideas. We suffer from, all the usual things that you might find from an average company in the United States or elsewhere. I still remember the session itself because I happened to ask the group, I said, if I work for you and I have an idea, what do you want me to do with it? Do I know what to do with it? You might ask yourself that question. If someone works for you and they have a good idea, or maybe a bad idea, but if they have an idea, what should they do with that idea? Guy stood up. He said, Mr. Tucker, I would just tell you, forget about it. He said, frankly, in this company, you're just going to beat your head against the wall because of, large corporate syndrome, or, Espoo, Finland was the headquarters, and they don't listen to it. And so I remember the session, and people were a little bit like, whoa, this guy is, kind of speaking. But I got the feeling this guy was speaking his truth, just telling it like he saw it. And on the plane, I remember, thinking, wow, rapid growth sure covers a lot of sins, because this is not the company that the public knows. But then I kind of put it out of my mind. I flew off to somewhere else and just crossed it off as a kind of anomaly. Well, I guess, you can get away with it. But then 1 year later, Apple introduced the iPhone. And Nokia began their slow but spectacular fall from grace, their spiral. And I thought back to that session in Palo Alto, and I thought back to these kinds of barriers to adaptation, barriers to innovation. And so I want to ask you, as we think about this adaptability mindset, how do you rate your own organization? I mean, you're associated with Corcentric here, so, there's a lot to be said about just kind of lifting up your sights with regard to where the future is going. But are you adaptable? Are you adapting in your organizations fast enough? Because you see, if the rate of change outside your organization is faster than the rate of change inside your organization, then the end is in sight. It's just a matter of time. And I also want to say a word or two about principled adaptation versus blind obedience, or blind adaptation, or whatever you want to call it. Because I think we see so many examples out there today of people going, well, this is the way the wind is blowing, so I'm just going to throw my values and my ethics to the wind and just go with the flow. And there are all these, research studies about this aspect of human nature. It's sort of interesting, right? In other words, we want to fit in, we want to go with the crowd, we want to be part of the majority. People will do all sorts of things to see and these experience, to fit in, let's just say. And so, as I mentioned earlier, during my career, I would quite often speak to this club called Rotary. Do I have any Rotarians in the room? Oh my goodness, not a single. Is there one back in the back? No. Okay, here are a couple. Yeah, great, all right. Well, Rotary clubs, like a lot of what we call service clubs, they're declining in membership. But I got to tell you, man, they're close to my heart, because I really like these guys and what they did. They would get together, they would do good works in the community and so forth. And they had this thing called the Rotary. It was started in 1905, by the way, during a period of reform. The four-way test. And we say, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? And you sort of contrast that with all that's going on with disinformation, misinformation, and all the kind of things that are sort of cropping up here as things that we need to adapt to. We need to, it used to be win-win negotiation and this and that. I mean, we'd come to meetings like this and we'd have speakers, telling us how to do a win-win negotiation and, partner with your suppliers and then there's this kind of ethic of like, I win and you lose, that is seemingly sweeping our country at this moment. I love this quote from Hannah Arendt. It talks about what is going on with regard to lying. It's a little jarring, but let me just read it to you. If everybody lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lies, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. A people that no longer can believe anything cannot make up its mind. It is deprived not only of its capacity to act, but also of its capacity to think and to judge. And with such people, you can then do what you please. Now, she wrote that, the historian Hannah Arendt wrote that in 1972. But I think it has a lot of bearing on our situation today. Our environment today. Number 4, the human agency mindset. Act with intention and purpose. As John said, you know, you didn't get in this room without a lot of intention and purpose in your career trajectory, because you're the cream of the crop. You are the movers and shakers of your industry, and that's why you're here. So this crowd knows a little bit about human agency, but I think human agency, if we take a step back, is sort of in the crosshairs here. It's sort of in the balance with all of this new technology and all of the changes that are occurring. They're leaving big parts of our society behind. And they're struggling. 45% of college students show no significant improvement in critical thinking, complex reasoning, or writing skills with their 4-year degree. 4th graders who score below basic and reading skills, highest in 20 years. 8th graders who score below basic and highest in the exam's 3-decade history. 70% of Americans fail a basic civic literacy test. In other words, what are the 3 branches of government? I don't know. That's what they say. 38% of Americans believe children today are prepared to fulfill their roles as informed, active citizens, according to a Chamber of Commerce. And then the average attention spans is 47 seconds. So this is the playing field, folks. This is the future. The question is, what will AI do to these? Now, there are various schools of thought on this. And I'm kind of in the balance here. I don't know that I have a particularly lane to swim in, except that we're going to see tremendous amounts of disruption from AI. And whether it'll save the world, as Mark Andreessen claims it will, whether our consciousness could be replicated in a machine and that would be fine, to Larry Page, or this new guy, Zach Cass, who's just written a book called The AI Renaissance. He says, what if thinking and reasoning were no longer rare advantages, but on-demand utilities available to everybody? So if we had more time, I'd love to parse this one a little bit, right? What will the effect of AI be? But I want to move into this, because these modes of thinking, they dominate, right? We need to understand what mode of thinking we're operating in. And then we need to be able to shift modes at will. And I meet a lot of people, I have to say, that are very worried. So I would say they're in the defeatist mode. And worry is a negative use of the imagination. And this is their state, right? I meet a lot of people who are still in denial that they have to change. We might say that they're sustainer mode thinkers. I want to encourage dreamer mode thinking. Right? When we come back to this notion of you incorporated, that's where I want to sort of ignite or have you ignite dreaming. Because dreaming is so important. Because dreaming is sort of experimenting with how you want the future to go. And then 4th and finally, there's this opportunity mode. You know, I had the most amazing conversation the other day with Doug Clark. And I just want to kind of summarize, because he is the kind of individual, I'm not trying to flatter you, Doug, but Doug is the kind of individual that I've been writing about, that I've been seeking out and studying all my life, all of my career, and then basically productizing that and selling that to other people who want to, in effect, emulate that kind of thing. I would have to say that also that, well, let me just get into this. First thing I learned from Doug is that he grew up on a farm in southern New Jersey. Now you may be saying, well, so what, right? But I happen to know that that's formative, in the sense that you're out there in nature, you're working hard, the animals and the crops that you're growing, they need attention 24/7, 365. I think it does something to an individual. He went to the University of Miami after a while there, and there was a business mentor who gave him a break in the action. He remembers her name. And what she did was very important. She gave him a leg up. Unbeknownst to him, She got him a job at Price Waterhouse, the accounting firm, back before they were Price Waterhouse Coopers. That led to work at Drexel Burnham. And from there, he moved into truck transportation, and that's where he began to make his magic happen. So then I asked him, I said, well, in so many words, what is your secret sauce, right? Because that's the question that I ask. I said, what is your routine? What do you do? And basically what I got out of him, we were just talking in stories and not in terms of techniques so much, but what I got out of him is that he is totally oriented to you, the customer. He wants to, and has always wanted to take on your problem, to take on your pain points. We can do that for you. We can specialize in that. You don't have to. You can do what you're best at doing. We can do what we're... And out of that came a series of innovations. You look at that mindset, though, folks, for just a moment, because, so many people, when they go to innovate, they'll sit around the table and go, hey, we could do this, and we're going to make a lot of money. If we do that, we'll make some money, right? Or we could shave off cost here, or we could do really important things like, put a little less product in the bag or box. Have you seen this at the grocery store, right? It used to be 10 ounces, now it's 8 ounces. Yeah. This is passing for innovation today. Not with Doug. Not with Corcentric, right? Because they want to add true value. And I'm not just flattering them or because I've studied so many of these organizations. They don't start with, what are we going to make off this deal? They start with, how will this help the customer, right? I think that's the important distinction here. And another thing, they look at your problems with a different eye than you look at your issues. Steve Jobs once said, it's not our customer's job to tell us what they want next. That's our job. So these guys take on that job. Where are you trying to go? And how can we help you get there? Okay, so that's what I want to say about that. I also want to say, let me just back up here. I also want to say that as a leader, I want you to start right here, right now, today, shifting things around. When you find somebody is speaking to you in defeatist mode about the state of the world or about the future, I want you to countervail it. Get the creative juices flowing. You can do that just by the way you language, because we're having these conversations in our own minds, right? So if somebody says, these technologies of connection, they're just tearing us apart, Facebook and social media and so forth. Come back with, how can digital technology contribute to human flourishing? That's called a challenge statement. Then you're off and running. We tried that and it didn't work. That's a misuse of history. Maybe it's time to try it again, because maybe conditions have changed. People on my team don't trust. Trust is a huge issue today. Social trust has been declining since 1972 when they first started doing the survey. They basically just asked people, it's a simple survey, hey, you basically on, all things being equal, do you basically trust people or, to be good or not, right? It's been declining gently over the last, since 1972, and it's taken a real nosedive over the last 10 years. So we got to build trust. Number 5, the long view mindset. Thinking in generations, not quarters. It's amazing how something like the printing press, 1440, a German by the name of Johann Gutenberg, comes up with an innovation, and that changes everything. Over time, serfs are leaving the farm, so to speak, to go work and find their fortune in the cities. The Enlightenment, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Industrial Age, all these things came about because people could exchange ideas and knowledge over vast distances. And so we want to take a long view mindset about where we are today. The value of history is something that I think we cannot short shrift at this hour, if you will. I do believe that. I do find that these leaders that I interview are often great believers and readers of history and biography so that we see what are the problems that this guy faced and how did he solve those problems? Because he didn't know how they were going to turn out either. So the value of history lies not in its ability to predict the future, but to enlighten the present. So important. Another thing that we learn from history is that pendulums swing back and forth. As simple as that sounds, right? But human nature never changes. And what this means is that there will always be Mother Teresa's and Pablo Escobar's on the spectrum there, right? History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. In other words, the kinds of conditions that sort of botch up will be different than they were in the past, but maybe a bubble is occurring. And one of the ways I like to trend watch is just by scanning the bestseller list. The New York Times has a good bestseller list. They come out with it every Sunday in the book review. And you can really tell a lot about a society by what they're buying, what they're reading. There's a book on there called Outlive, about the longevity revolution by a guy named Adius. And it's been on the list for like 179 weeks. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. The arc of human history bends toward progress. I have meditated on that one quite often. I encourage you to do as well, especially when you're feeling a little bit negative about the way things might be going here in our society. The arc of history bends towards progress. The farther backwards you can look, the further forward you can see. I borrowed this one from good old Winston Churchill. But it's sort of true. And I think a good sort of informational diet, if you will, is to have a diet that includes history. I know the young people today have never been less interested in history. The number of history majors in college is very low. I think that's going to change. Maybe they're absorbing history in different ways, a little more bite-sized pieces, ad hoc, whatever, right? But yeah, so number 6 is what I call the anticipatory mindset. And I do believe that we need to anticipate. I think it will become a kind of superpower. There's research out of the University of Pennsylvania, a guy named Tetlock. Some of you may be familiar with his work, but he does these prediction tournaments. Just gets regular folks, from all walks of life, not, genius level Mensa folks, but just regular folks who have a passing interest in what's going on in the world, and gives them the ability to make certain predictions. And I won't go through it all, but the bottom line is that there are certain people out there that have an uncanny ability to predict the future more accurately than the rest of us. And DARPA, hired this guy to help them out because obviously in military warfare you need to have that ability to predict. And number 7 here, and finally, is your future view is the future you, the visionary mindset. What is the vision that you have for your life and where you're going and where you want to end up? And you may be looking up here on the stage and going, wow, this guy is, of an age, right? He's no spring chicken. And you're absolutely right. I've been doing this for quite a while. I used to use a line in my talks. Sometimes I would say, futurists cannot predict the future. And I say, if I could predict the future, I wouldn't be here. I would be lying on a beach somewhere, sipping a Mai Tai. And folks, that's a silly line. I'm here because I enjoy what I do. I enjoy sharing ideas with folks like you. Believe me, I get a lot of those Mai Tais. We go to Hawaii twice a year, but the idea of sitting on that beach day after day is just my definition of not where I want to be. I think it was the historian David McCullough. Some of you may recognize that name. And McCullough said something in this little short book that his daughter kind of put together of some of his speeches and so forth. It's just a wonderful little book. I can't remember the name of it. But he said, boy, the idea of retiring so I can, just kick back is just anathema to me. He said, I love what I do. He said, the idea of getting up in the morning and having purposeful work, having things that I want to go after, right? And write about, think about. He said, that's the meaning of it all. And I think, what we're doing is as we've hurtled toward the future here, what we're also seeing is a kind of counter trend. Have you all heard of the human agency, the human flourishing movement? Anybody, does that ring any kind of bells? Well, this is a movement out of Harvard and Baylor University. They've begun studying people, like 200,000 people around the world, asking them basic questions about, are you thriving? Do you feel like you're doing better or doing worse, right? Are you losing ground? And the surprising thing out of that is that around the world, most people feel like their lives are on the upswing, except in the U.S., and New Zealand, Australia, and a couple other countries, Western European countries. Now, why would that be, right? And so I think what the future will be about is sort of unpacking what it means to be successful, right? I mean, if you had the choice, would you retire early? I've come to Florida, I've come to Orlando here almost 40 years. To deliver speeches and meet with consulting clients and so forth. And invariably, I'm picked up in the car by a gentleman, and he'll introduce himself. He looks sort of corporate, and I'm going, wow, this guy doesn't, has a little bit different look here. And we get to talking, and he'll say, yeah, came down here to Florida, and man, I retired from Union Carbide or whatever it was, and got down here, and boy, I got into the golf right away. Sometimes I'll even play 2 games, 18 holes a day. And I did that and did that and did that day after day after day. And I'm going, well, why are you driving the car? And then he says, because I got tired of it. It wasn't stimulating. It wasn't getting me out and about with people. So I would just, for what it's worth, at age 72, those of you who are in your 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, 60s, I just ask you, what does flourishing mean to you? Does it mean retirement? Kicking back? Most people, when they retire, they don't live very long after that. You see, the good news is that this longevity revolution, increased health care and medicine and diet and so forth, is giving us an average of 30 extra years than we had before. Somebody living 100 years ago. And I am good friends with the head of the UCSB Longevity Center out at the campus. He says, no, it's not 30 years extra we're going to have 50 years extra. Whoa, that's a lot of time to sit on the beach and drink your Mai Tais, right? So we're... in a way, that's sort of the good news. But then the question is, how do you find meaning and purpose in that equation? And it's not easy. I see just a lot of people who just are not happy in retirement because they've lost their identity. So anyway, there they are, folks. That's about all the time we've got. How we doing? Here are the 7. I do hope that you'll take a look at the book. And I mean that. I've spent 6 years working on that book for you. And so if you'd like a copy of these slides, let me just close with just a few thoughts here, if I may. And then we'll head off to lunch. But we've talked about mindsets, we've talked about skill sets, we've talked about some tools for navigating this new era. I think what happens is when you begin to actually use these in your life, you will not only make better decisions, but you will prosper. You will thrive. You will begin to see the mode of thinking that you're in. and the one that you want to move into, right? This next 10 years is not going to be easy for a lot of people. And it means that if you're prepared for it, you can not only help yourself, your family, but you can help those around you to be successful in this new period. I really think it's going to get more difficult. Sorry to be so negative about that, perhaps, but I think that we're going to face a situation where we got to make some choices here. And I don't think we're quite ready to make those decisions, right? I think in the next 10 years, a choice confronts us. Will we, as we feel our foundation shaking, will we withdraw in anxiety and panic? Or be paralyzed by fear? Or will we muster the courage to exercise our human agency and return to things like the rotary four-way test and unleash our innovativeness? The future, my friends, is not something to fear or to flee from. The future is something that we can shape, one choice, one decision at a time, with the right compass, with the right mindset. The future is what we make it. The future is what we build it to be. Thank you very much. Thank you.